A Fox News alert, the Pentagon keeping pretty close tabs on North Korea, monitoring any signs of a missile launch or a nuclear test after the Kim regime warned that the U.S. would receive a Christmas gift unless it eased up on sanctions. Now, President Trump saying the U.S. can deal with whatever Kim Jong-un does.
Oh, that's okay. We'll find out what the surprise is, and we'll deal with it very successfully. And let's see what happens. Everybody's got surprises for me, but let's see what happens. I handle them as they come along.
Joining me now is retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis of the U.S. Army, now a senior fellow and military expert at Defense Priorities. Colonel, thank you so much for joining us. Merry Christmas.
Thanks for having me, Molly. Merry Christmas to you, too.
Pretty serious topic today, of course, North Korea, but the president managed to have a little bit of a lighthearted response when he talked about saying, oh, well, maybe it's a nice gift, a beautiful vase. Your thoughts on what could potentially coming from North Korea as they're leveling these bluster and threats in our direction?
Yeah, what's very clear is that North Korea wants to get rid of a lot of these economic sanctions. And President Trump, I think, absolutely recognizes that we remain in the dominant position. Even if they later on today or in the days to come do launch any kind of test missile or something, a lot of people in Washington are going to be all up in arms and talk about how it's a crisis. I think President Trump recognizes it won't be a crisis because we remain in the absolute preeminent dominant position militarily, economically, and diplomatically. Now, that being said, if we don't want these things to continue, we do have to change our ability and our willingness to engage diplomatically in a potential win-win scenario. We can move this down. We can move towards peace, but it's going to have to be a change in our diplomatic engagement.
Do you think the next step is to get back to the negotiating table? What are the next steps? As you mentioned, these sanctions are in place, and there's no reason to think that they'll be lifted, particularly with North Korea's most recent behavior.
Well, see, we have to understand something. I think that those who think that we want to go for full denuclearization up front before we release any sanctions, like John Bolton advocates, that's a complete dead end. And if we go down that path, these kinds of things are going to continue to go on. But what we can do is can moderate that and say, hey, we're willing to go on a step-by-step basis. If you take concrete steps, we're willing to take concrete steps also. We have to get to a position where we're willing to, even with someone as heinous as Kim Jong-un is, because he's a murderous dictator, but we have to give him the ability to have some kind of a win so that we can get the things that we want to. But the bottom line is our security remains intact.
Yeah, there were these new efforts, particularly at the beginning of the year, with the president actually going to this historic meeting with Kim Jong-un, and it seemed like there was sort of try to create a warmth, some sort of relationship. And then the last 6 months of the year or so, since May, he started the rocket tests back up again. How do we get back to that negotiating table? If not, perhaps no return to some warmth between these, the world leaders, between President Trump and Kim Jong-un. How do we just get, the negotiators back to the table?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I was actually in Hanoi in February, and there was a deal on the table ready to be had that could have moved us closer towards peace. The Korean government was all about that. They were completely in support of that, but it appears from what we've heard that John Bolton undercut that and included or induced the president not to go with that. That deal can still be resurrected, and that could start the process towards inter-Korean reconciliation, which they want. It helps our emphasis, and it also moves us towards peace. So we have to re-engage on things that can be done, start small, and then we can move on to more substantive things.
Well, it's fascinating to hear you talk about that. Of course, Bolton has left, so there is this new potential for new leadership and a new year, 2020. So what do you think would get it back to that point?
Well, I hope that President Trump takes a much more proactive role in this, and maybe with the guys who are not pushing back against him, his instincts have been right almost from the beginning, especially in foreign policy issues. And I'd like to see him take a more proactive view to impose his views and tell his advisors what they're going to do and not leave it up to them to interpret anything like that. Because if we follow his moves, I think that we would have had a deal back in February, and that is still on the table. And President Trump does have the ability, maybe more than any other president, to say, I'm going to take some positive steps and make some kind of a deal with Kim Jong-un and move us in a positive direction. He can do that.
Yeah, thank you for your insights on North Korea. It's been fascinating to, get your insights on that. I almost hate to shift gears, but we did have another topic we want to talk about. Defense Secretary Mark Esper is reportedly considering reducing the number of troops around the world. Now, we know the president has made as a key part of his campaign, promises made, promises kept, he has been working towards bringing American troops home around the world. Your thoughts on that? There was a particular report in the New York Times highlighting Africa, but over the course of the last year, a couple other countries have also been highlighted when it comes to troop withdrawal from Iraq to Afghanistan. Also, South Korea has been mentioned, although leaders there have pushed back on that idea. Your thoughts on potential troop withdrawals?
Yeah, this is a really great thing. I'm really glad to see that this is actually coming up. And I think this is also an effort by President Trump to say, hey, look, I've had a number of aides over the years who have pushed back on any subject, any talk at all about reducing troops or withdrawing troops, no matter whether they were needed or not. And a lot of those, most of those have now gone. I would love to see President Trump say, you know what, this is what I got elected on. This is what the American people want. And we are going to withdraw from Africa. We are going to withdraw from Syria. And I think we ought to not just reduce, but also withdraw from Afghanistan, because that's in our interest. And to answer one of your questions, it is not going to cause us any increase in security risk by leaving those places, because we're not protecting ourselves by being there right now. It's nothing but a loss of blood, and it's a loss of treasure, and it's not making us safer.
All right, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, Merry Christmas. Thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate it.